Thank you for that. And I suppose I should firstly say hello to Mike Hill, our local MP. So some of this stuff will be like common knowledge to Mike. So if we move on to the next slide, this should give you a concept really. That's Hartlepool, and Dyke House is where I currently work, which is about a square mile. And on the right hand side, it looks quite green, but actually what you've got is 2 school fields and a cemetery. So it doesn't lend itself particularly to outdoor space, which is one of the constant concerns we have from our local community. If we move to the next slide. This is the common portrayal you'll see of Hartlepool. Top left-hand side is our fantastic engineering, work, taking down oil rigs and recommissioning them into other things. A nuclear power station, crap homes, and the bottom right picture is what Skint Britain did to us, which was a bit of a Channel 4. So if you ever Channel 4 don't like us particularly, and that's the image they gave of Hartlepool. If we go to the next one. For us, that's more of what Hartlepool's about. Heart Biologicals are making medical equipment. We've got, some fantastic renewable energy on the way, fantastic marina. And we've got kids actually who make the most of stuff and really enjoy themselves in spite of some of the circumstances they grow up in. And I'm sure it's the same around the country. Next slide, please. So that's the annex, is our community centre on the left-hand side there. So we're not big and we don't work in a big area, but what we try and do is distill the national opportunities which have come and actually understand how that can work at a local level. A few years ago, all the third sector were told to scale up in order to compete with the national providers on delivery of service, and my trustees decided to scale deeper. So actually, what we don't do particularly is try and spread so far as to be ineffective. What we do is having a fantastic relationship with our local community. And that's based on community organising. So, essentially we build relationships with people which start with, 3 very simple questions, and it's literally going outdoor knocking. And it starts with, what do you love about Dyke House? What you don't like so much? And the most important question of all is like, and what are you prepared to do about it? Are you prepared to get together with other people who have very similar issues and start to challenge this and change it as far as you can? And actually, it's reasonably effective. We know in Hartlepool that we've got one of the highest rates of exclusions in the country. So, a group of parents have recently got together to start challenging that sort of approach. So actually, we're almost the cover for people to do things for themselves. And, so we're rooted in, particularly looking at, individual and community agency. So how do we get people together so they feel they're able to make change? And then how do we get enough of those people together so they can take the community out of the current situation it's in? And we don't do a bad job, and they do a brilliant job. Next slide, please. So when we talked about the employment side of stuff, it's been a really interesting opportunity to look at the ONS data. And I think what we have to look at is that there's like systemic above average unemployment rate, and it's been historically above the Great Britain average for, at the worst of the Great Britain average for 5 out of the last 15 years. And the little 17.8% is the current unemployment rate in Dyke House. So for me, this is not just a snapshot in time. This is a long-term issue. Next slide, please. Our claimant count is always higher historically than the Northeast in Great Britain. These are as far as the data I can go back with. And we are where we were in 1995 today. And actually, what's interesting is that Joseph Rowntree Foundation in their latest report suggesting that post-COVID, we could be looking at a claimant count of around 16%. But again, we're always above. We might shadow what the country does, but we're always worse. Next slide, please. And actually, what does this actually mean in real life? Well, what it means is that we have fewer than 6 jobs for every 10 people of working age. It's about 5.6. And in the next few months, we're looking at probably having 33 applications for each vacancy. So that in itself, we have systemic issues around the availability and opportunity in the town. But as you all know, poverty doesn't just stop you from looking within, it brings your horizons in, so your expectations of where you can work, so the Tees Valley and Job Centre Plus will say go to Newcastle, but if you're in a low paid job and you've got to get to Newcastle on rubbish public transport and then be in a low paid job when you get there, actually effectively it's not worth your time. And the next one, please. So I was trying to look at some of the successes that we've got, because there's one thing I hate is always being like really negative about stuff. So our NVQ level 4 rate has gone up from 15% to 25% over the last 15 years or so, which looks brilliant until, if we go to the next slide, we're now at where the Great Britain average was in 2004. And these were just two things which I thought were topical. So if you can remember George Bush and John Kerry and now 58, essentially our NVQ level 4 rate is where the Great Britain average was in 2004. So we are 16 years behind as a town in terms of the higher level qualifications. Next slide, please. And so what I've done is just shown you there that if you look at where we are in 2020 from 2004, so yes, there has been an increase, but where we are relative to the rest of the country, we're at least 10 years and up to 15 or 16 years behind everybody else. And so the question for me is, why is that the case? And even if I look at our secondary schools, our Progress 8 score is below the national average, and it's below, which is essentially we are worse than schools in other communities of a similar nature. So we're almost creating, whatever the system is, it's failing children now, and that we're not even as good as the rest of the people facing the same issues. So we've got something that needs to change quite significantly. And again, so in Dyke House, that part of Hartlepool, there's only 34% of people have an of GCSEs essentially, and that's compounded when you think only 3.6% of a higher level qualification. So that neighbourhood has significantly worse educational outcomes, which stores up the issues about then what jobs are available and what can I realistically apply for. Next one, please. But there is a genuine success story actually. The FE College has done some outstanding work around apprenticeship. So what there is, so it's the number 2 in the UK, and partly because the principal is passionate about social mobility. But if you ask him, and we do, he's worried about the talent exodus. If there's nothing to keep you in the town, when you've done outstanding work and you're skilled up, what does that mean? And actually, are we then just going to reinforce the problems about how do we change this? And how do we keep talent local so that the whole town can benefit? One of the things I've been thinking about recently is actually how do you make apprenticeships feel as important as a university? Because everybody's pushed to go to university, and you wonder whether there is scope for something like a residential apprenticeship, so that actually our young people who are taking apprenticeships get the chance to feel as though they've done something special, because actually it is special, and that they get that growth opportunity, which long term will make their horizons expand further than what they currently are. Next slide, please. So what are the consequences of fewer jobs and low paid jobs and low educational attainment? Well, as of today, 32% of the children in Hartlepool grow up in a workless household. And I think the next stat, and it isn't just about education, employment, of course, there's health and so on, but actually when life expectancy is declining, that's not a relative, that's an absolute value. So if we accept that there are issues, and we have to start thinking about what do we do about those issues. Next one, please. So this is where we come in as a community anchor or a local, a charity locally. So we've been able to, work with our national colleagues to think about how, what is it that local people need to enable them to do things for themselves and to give them a fighting chance, because actually the best thing in the world we can give them at the moment is a fighting chance. So, you would have heard a lot about the digital divide, but we've known about this forever. So we've got funded free open access to ICT. So we've got computers available which people can use. Obviously, COVID's made things increasingly difficult. For kids who don't have opportunities to have their own devices, we've donated them to the local secondary school to give out to local parents. And that's when they've got pupil premium kids, which is interesting. We've got people creating community businesses to try and address some of those issues themselves. So Andrew there runs something called RunFit, which is about getting local, unfit people fitter rather than being public health, telling people to eat 5 a day. He actually gets people who are overweight and, struggling with their health together to do things. Emma on the right-hand side runs Blooming Art, which is about using creativity to help people's lives improve. And once your confidence levels goes up, your opportunity to employment and actually the belief that you can get a job goes up. We have our own, we're the only organisation in Hartlepool that still employs an additional employment worker, so that they actually get one-to-one support to find a job. And it's interesting what Tom was saying about the role of Job Centre Plus, which I'll come to in a minute. But, we are able to support people to best show the CV, stupid stuff like get your spellings right. If you've got a low educational attainment and you don't look at it, but it's, it's one of those things which will get you binned from day one. And the best thing, the thing that's really challenging is to give you a belief that you can get a job and that it's worth the while getting it right and making the application right. Because to be fair, when you're up against 33 other people, it's soul destroying. I also think, the photograph on the bottom right side there is Catherine. She's a researcher from Sheffield University, and we did a study on how local people work together to make things better. And actually, we were able to identify around 60 different ways people supported each other. So actually, when people are in that position, they mitigate the worst of stuff by helping one another. That doesn't create the systemic changes required, but what it does is generally keeps the wolves from the door and makes things better than they would otherwise be. Next slide, please. So when I was doing this, I had, I had some reflections, and I think, the term left behind, when I look at the long term of this isn't left behind because that presupposes we were at the same starting point. And as far as I can see, when I go back, we weren't at the same starting point. Our neighbourhoods were never left behind. They never had a chance. And I think we have to recognise that. So I'd possibly call that the irrelevant places, because for a long time they have been. I think the scale of the challenge, to be 16 years behind on higher qualifications is going to take an enormous effort to get anywhere near to doing that. When I look at the nuclear power station, which is one of our economic anchors, employs people on good salaries, that's on borrowed time now. So what are we doing? What are we thinking about? If we've only got a 5 to 10 year lifespan on something which employs well, we have an imminent problem. And I think there's something about what's the next thing, because we always seem late to it. So, it's not as though we've been stuck in the past, that we just always look to our industrial heritage. We've thought, the town reinvented itself with things like call centres just after they went away. Our Jackson Landing shopping precinct came, and then we went online to buy all our goods and stuff. So we always seem to be behind, but we're never ahead of what's coming next. And I think there's something about how do we do that? I think there is something around vision fatigue that we have heard so often by so many of our local politicians about, we're going to change Hartlepool and we're going to have £100 million investment here and £30 million investment there. And actually none of it's delivered. And I think therefore there is a democratic impact on that. If we look at our last local election, which was a by-election, only 17% of the population voted in that. And that is actually in one of our more successful neighbourhoods, one of the more successful wards. So actually when people look and think, actually, you say all this stuff and you don't do it, there is actually a democratic impact on that. Now, the data backs up the lived experience. So where we've got, where people tell me, I'm trying, I can't get a job, there aren't any jobs and so on. Actually, that's the reality of it, which comes back to, Tom's point. Job Centre Plus isn't fit for purpose. It is about arts covering so that they can turn around and say, you have done looking for so many jobs which don't exist or aren't realistic, so that somebody doesn't get sanctioned. It's a sanctioning system. It's not You know, it isn't about supporting people to find work and genuinely have a chance of getting that work. And I also think, so I think there need to be, we need to think about bringing humanity back in the system. I think that's what Tom's point was really well explained, that humanity, actually, it's hard work, it's soul destroying, and we want to help you do that. It takes an enormous culture shift, but it would be brilliant if we could. And it's about hope, it's not about aspiration. When we did some work not that long ago with young people in our youth club about what did you want to be? And actually they just wanted, I want to be a plumber, a cook, a cleaner. Some of them wanted to be, they wanted to be managers, they wanted to run places, they wanted their own business. So actually we don't have a lack of aspiration. What they have is a lack of hope, because there's a point when actually the reality of that is really difficult to achieve in a community like this. And I think the last one is about how do we focus upstream rather than mitigation? I spend an awful lot of my time looking about how, if you look at a food bank, or if you look at, how do we start focusing upstream? How can we start changing the way that we work so that we're not having to tackle this all the time? So what can we do with education to make it better for our young people? What can we do with skills training so that we're skilling people up for the next thing coming rather than the thing that's just passed? How can we do that so that we're constantly fighting the impact of this and never really been able to look beyond how do we keep people's head above the water? How do we enable them to tread water? And I think that's probably the most important thing at the moment I think we can do. And the last slide is just say thank you really for allowing me to look at this and to share my thoughts with you.